Thank you for being with us today on today's episode of the Healthcare Leadership Excellence Podcast. We are in for a treat today. I love it when we have someone who can dig into the soft skills, but also has a dynamite background of consulting work. She used to work with one of the major consulting houses. We had a delightful conversation a couple of months back in preparation. So I would like to welcome to our program today, Tara Austraat-Churik. Tara, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today.
So give us a brief background of what brings you to your current work with Blue Matter. Tell us what Blue Matter is about. Just help our listeners understand who they're talking with.
Great. So I began my career in government service for the FBI as an intelligence analyst. And then from there, worked through public sector consulting, where I really learned the core work that I do today. So things like organizational redesign, process improvement, change management. And so those skills, from a really early time in my career, continue to shape what I do today and how I help clients today. After a few years in that space, I decided that I wanted to pursue my passion of medicine a bit more and get closer to the life sciences and healthcare. And so since then, I kind of made it my goal to spend time in, almost every aspect, I would say, of the pharmaceutical life cycle. And along the way, I've spent quite a bit of time with academic medical centers and universities as well. And so I started out in the R&D space, in drug safety, in clinical work. Then I moved a bit to personalized medicine, companion diagnostics. Then I wanted to learn a bit about commercialization and launch. So I spent some time there, specifically in launch and market access. Then AI emerged. And so I was one of the early joiners of what became Watson Health, where we worked globally in driving large commercial partnerships with healthcare institutions as well as pharmaceutical organizations. From there, I joined, and then I did actually some leadership in IBM. So from a technology perspective, working on alliances, channels, and ecosystem. And then most recently, for the past 5 years before joining Blue Matter, I spent my time working with both sponsors and sites on clinical trial optimization. And that's where I really deepened my experience working with healthcare leaders at leading institutions, really on the West Coast and East Coast, and really all across the country. And then at Blue Matter. So at Blue Matter, I've been brought on to build up our capabilities in R&D specifically. So today that looks like quite a bit of work in clinical optimization, helping pharmaceutical clients really kind of master their portfolio prioritization, understand, especially in this era of evolving FDA and regulatory guidance, where they need to be focused and why. So that's where I spend a lot of my time today, and the journey that I took to get there.
One thing that fascinated me, Tara, was the fact that your bachelor's is in English. How
Yep.
is that humanities background? And you also have a master's, and the master's was in,
Translational medicine. Yep.
okay.
Mhm.
So I remember Tom Peters once saying that when IBM started hiring computer science engineers and not English majors to do programming, that's when they started their decline. How does a humanities background, how has that helped you in how you think and approach things?
Um, I really think that the humanities is having a moment, and I think the moment's actually about to get pretty large in the world of AI, because the humanities, I mean, in particular, or literature for me, taught me to go very deep in the discipline
Mhm.
to really, really hone in on critical thought, to be asking the deep questions as to why something is the way that it is. It helped me learn to communicate uh, well, honestly, to understand others, to listen to others, to learn from others, to be very quick with synthesis, to do that in a literary way, meaning, right, that I'm bringing that kind of in AI, we talk about the corpus, right? The corpus of knowledge, right? And so that's really at the end of the day who we are as people, right? The knowledge that we've experienced over our lives and what we're bringing to what we do every day. And I think to have the opportunity to learn and grow in philosophy and literature, which was actually my focus. Um, it 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 just grounds you, I think, in a way to understand humanity and the challenges that we face as leaders, leading others, in a very in a very deep way. And I'm very glad that I chose to do that. I know recently it's been a topic in the press because Anthropic, right, Claude, co-founder, is herself a literature major, right? Left OpenAI to found to found that system. And I think that that's exactly the type of thinking and educational skills that people are going to need going forward, because AI is on a path to commoditize much else. But it's quite hard to commoditize, what it means to be a literary individual.
Absolutely. So that description you just gave of why that was important spawned a couple of questions for me. Um, it fascinates me how people critically think and how they problem solve. I can't read enough on the topic because I don't think we spend enough time figuring that out. Carl goes to school, I get a degree, I get a master's degree, and as I look at all my courses, thousands of dollars worth of courses, Tara, there wasn't a single one that focused on how to critically think or problem solve. It
Yeah.
may have been tangential within the course, but one of my favorite books was written by, and I look up at my bookshelf here, by two McKinsey consultants called Bulletproof Problem Solving. It's one of my favorite books
Mm.
because it just gives such a framework. And I had this opportunity a few years back to interview a C suite of an organization because I was coaching one of their executives. And it occurred to me that it was a perfect time to ask people how they problem solved. And one of them said, he was head of their whole hospital division. And he said, with a straight face, well, Carl, first of all, you have to define the problem. That's kind of said, well, yeah. And he said, Carl, half the people that come in my office are trying to solve the wrong problem.
Mhm.
So, with that preface, tell us, our listeners are mid to upper level healthcare providers or administrators who have great degrees, mega intelligence, but I think suffer the same thing that Carl did. None of their courses really taught critical thinking. Now, a doctor certainly can do the diagnostic decision path, but sometimes can't extrapolate that into the boardroom. So, with that lengthy and windy introduction there, tell us a bit how you use critical thinking and how you take apart a problem.
I'm trying to think of a recent example. So I think, um, and maybe this is because of my background, training, whatnot, but there's sort of an immediate uh problem, but there's never just one. So typically, that first surface layer often has a number of root causes. And so I think, one thing that people can do right away is sort of ask why at least three times, you know, so, to keep going. And then probably by the time you get to the third why, you'll get to what you actually need to solve for. And and that is something that can be done relatively quickly.
Mhm.
Because what I find is, in particular, for your core audience is just described, often, they're going to be in situations where they're going to be perhaps in, leadership meetings, executive meetings, board meetings, whatnot, where time is really of the essence. And the faster that you can respond with a credible response, right, the better, you're going to be perceived, right, as sort of leading in that role, leading in that organization. So that's just sort of a quick way to get at a root cause. And then from there, you could quickly kind of extrapolate. And I was thinking threes because consulting, that's what we do. Um, you can kind of quickly think of, three things that you could do to solve that actual, root cause.
I joke, perhaps it's not joking. I joke with some of my clients that I can easily make it to noon every day without thinking because I'm in overdrive. I do much of the same things. I'm, doing this, that, and my brain is just done that before. Let's shove Carl in this direction. I'm in reaction mode. Um, Help our listeners, and this is, you might think, gee, Carl, this is pretty deep, but how do I stop reacting, not in a bad way, but just in a motor drive way, and really start thinking about things to a level that you talk about organizational redesign, change. We'll get into process improvement in a few minutes. What do you recommend to the people you work with, especially younger, about how to effectively think? Is that too fluffy a question?
No, no, it's a great one because I mean, especially I think post-pandemic, I've just seen this in every institution. We've shifted to back to back to back meetings, often without even 5 or so minutes in between. Even if companies, do that standard like 5 minute kind of hold or block, it typically just gets taken over. And there's just no time to think. And so something about that has to change. But I also understand the day-to-day realities. And even in, healthcare systems where, I mean, people really never did stop going into work. You just did it in different ways, right? Wearing different, masks and things. But, the in-person work really didn't stop. But now it's changed because the whole world seems to be working this way. So what I would say is number one is to be very intentional, but being intentional doesn't mean that you need to block your calendar from 12 to 1 and keep it because I just don't think that's realistic. I think certainly you can try to do that. But if that doesn't work, it may be 7 to 8 p.m. Right? It may be 5 or 6 a.m. if you believe in sort of the 5 a.m. club type
Mhm.
methodologies, which there is definitely scientific proof behind that those ways of working. And maybe you don't
Can
have
you
to get
go
up at 5 a.m., but maybe 6 a.m.
can you go into that a bit? Because I imagine many of our listeners haven't heard about that.
Yeah, so basically, there's a practice where you basically try for an hour per day to make it your own time before the day starts at a time that's reasonable for you. But unfortunately, for some people, that has to be 5 a.m. because of, getting children to school or, commuting to work or whatever the case may be. But the first 20 minutes generally are meditation, and it can be 5 minutes, right? Because I find meditation very, very hard, but it's possible to do, even if it's a few minutes. Then the next 20 minutes are spent in exercise. So, some form of exercise, right? Cardio, stretching, strength training, ideally strength training, but some variation of exercise. Then the next 20 minutes are spent in like a self-reflective practice that is actionable. So that could be something like journaling. But if people just can't bring themselves to journal, I can't. Full disclosure, things like planning your day, setting out your priorities, and what you will accomplish for the day can have the same effect. Um, where so at this point, right, you're now starting your day. You are mentally invigorated, you're physically invigorated, and you have a clear plan of what you want to do for that day. Maybe you've spent the time thinking about what you want to accomplish that week, that month. But you've put some time into yourself. You know, you've put some time into thinking about the things that you need to do to go from A to B, whatever A to B is for you. And you know, that's not to say that this will happen you know, every day at first, or you could try to break it up into ways that do work. But it's the concept that, you know, at the end of the day, we have to care for our mind, right? We have to care for our body, and we have to dedicate some strategic time per day to thinking about where we're going and how we're going to get there.
I think that segues a bit to our comment earlier in our pre-call about taking control and winning. Any other things you'd like? I love that, take control and win. So you've talked about the meditation practice, the exercise practice, the self-care. Any other things on that along the take control and win?
Um, I think, and we, you know, may segue there, but I think that again, your and this core audience, people are going to be at different points along their journey.
Mhm.
And some people are going to be relatively new to leadership, and some people will have been there a while. But the thing that I have observed after working with, you know, various types and forms of, I'll call it like healthcare institutions, right? Whether it's, you know, AMCs or teaching hospitals or um, hospitals affiliated with universities, like just over the past several years, there's a way that people get into the practice of medicine, right? And healthcare leadership and administrative leadership. But for folks that have come up along the medical pathway, you know, there's a certain way of thinking when you're a doctor that makes you successful. And a lot of it is about your own judgment and your own mind, your, you know, your gut, your learned gut, if you will, right? The decision pathway that you talked about before, that's just, you know, ingrained and taught in leading healthcare professionals. But the second that you step into the leadership role, there are changes that you have to make to your point around taking control and winning, because your career becomes not only about yourself, but about other people. And I think for a lot of people making that shift, that is a huge, huge stressful change.
Could couldn't agree more.
And I've seen that.
Yeah. And so, probably jumping ahead here, but we talked before about your points about the importance of self-leadership and leadership in this new multi-generational workforce that we're working at. So take as much time as you want to delve into. I just finished a 4-day series of workshops at a med school talking just about self leadership. So I'd love to see what you can give our audience about that topic, because generally it's, well, and I'm being somewhat sarcastic here, go take a yoga class, try and work out, but we do have a 70-hour week that's waiting for you when you're done with that.
Yep.
The message that many times we have in companies.
Yep.
So self leadership, and then I think it's five. We have the silent generation, the boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, that are all currently in the worksite. So take it away, Tara. Anything you can teach us on self and multi-generational leadership.
So, I mean, a I've wrestled with this throughout my entire career in terms of the self leadership and the sense of like carving out time for yourself. I think that's just the biggest problem because uh, I mean, folks, right, in this field, you put others' needs before your own, right? I'm in the position of client service, so that means that, whatever my client needs, that's what I do. And if it means I have something scheduled that I can't do because my client needs something, like that's what I do, meaning I serve the
Mm,
client. Um, and I think that um, that I don't think that that will necessarily change about the profession that I'm in. And then similarly, I mean, literally, in some cases here, we're talking about, okay, people have surgery scheduled, right? Starting at 7 a.m. So, you got to kind of be, you're going to have to be ready for that. You're going to have to mentally prepare for that, be there, show up, do that. And you're going to have, long days, right? At the end of a surgery day, then, people often have meetings or whatnot, and they need to go home, and, it could be, very, very long days. And I don't think that that is, atypical, but it, like, even, myself, right? Now having a younger son, which was a huge adjustment for me, um is that's another element of, okay, I'm not just going to be able to do the things that I used to do because I have caretaking responsibilities now as well, right? And but I think that even still, I everyone every single human can find an hour once or twice a week to go and work out,
mhm,
right? It might be, an early or late time on the weekend, right? It might be a late evening. It might be something. And so I think like you just have to make it part of the puzzle. You
mhm,
just have to make it part of the puzzle, right? And then similarly, reflecting on the time for others. So I think one of the biggest things that like people who are, say, more advanced in their career, right? Whether it's like boomers or Gen X, right, are generally, going to, and some extent now millennials as well, are going to be moving into, kind of management to upper management, so to speak, right now.
mhm,
So, a big part of being a successful leader is carving out time to meet with people who are up and coming, right? Whether they're, the more junior millennials, Gen Z, et cetera. Um, Pretty soon, I think we're going to have what Gen Alpha, I think, is after.
I think so. Yeah.
Are going to be coming up through the workforce, and their lives have been shaped in just ways that like ours just haven't from a young age. And I think that you really kind of have to make the time to connect with, understand, understand where their career goals, where they want to take their career, what type of experiences they want, so that you can give them those type of experiences. But in doing that, right, you then get the leverage. You get the responsibility to work alongside them and coach them and help them grow. In doing that, you get the benefit of the leverage, and they get the benefit of actually doing and executing and learning and achieving. And the thing is that especially in the age of AI, I mean, I see this every day. It's honestly sometimes a lot easier
Mhm.
to have a conversation with Claude than it is to grow another human. And that is a very, very dangerous dynamic for our workforce, you know?
So, oh, the multiple places I could go with my next thoughts. Um, so I was just in the meeting yesterday, Tara. Um, some people that are very second or third level adopters, and at this one med school, very concerned that many of the medical students are using AI instead of using their brains.
Hmm.
And so talk to us about, from your view, you've worked in the highest levels of one very big, well-known consulting firm. You're with Blue Matter. Give our listeners a perspective, because I think most of us, myself included, know enough about AI to be horribly uninformed and rather dangerous of what we're afraid of, or whether we, or something we have no idea that's going to hit us like a freight train. So, talk to us about the appropriate, inappropriate, what your concerns are regarding this nebulous AI out there.
So I think in terms of the workforce and the question that you've asked about like people using AI, not their brains. So I think the first thing I think to recognize is that people, and this should be like a golden rule of, everyone using AI is you should not use AI for things for which you cannot judge the quality of the output. In other words, you cannot, simply take it at face value. Even with, things that would seem, I'm going to call it objective, like math, there
Mhm,
will be math errors made.
mhm,
So if you just, sort of rely on even things that you think are like, oh, well, okay, this is not abstract reasoning, right? This is like math, you
mhm.
know, even that there will likely be errors introduced. So I think it's learning how to use AI for the acceleration power that it gives, for the co-ideation, for the brainstorming. But then it's up to the individual, right, to take those suggestions or the outputs and then critically interrogate each one. That, if you do that, like especially like in our profession, right, as like as junior consultants, right, as folks coming in and using AI, it can absolutely be an accelerator for them, you know.
Mhm.
But then through that process of critical interrogation, of checking analysis, um, of letting the implications of the checking drive new thought, that to me is an ideal way of working because you're kind of getting the benefit but you're not letting it replace what you as a human do in the sense of your creative thought. And even say if someone had no experience, we don't really have people like that, but just in the event that someone doesn't have much experience or whatnot, you can still learn and grow because you're interacting in that way. I think that's the biggest takeaway that I would have. You know, that's the biggest one.
Got it. Let's jump back to leadership for a couple of moments. Um, on a call this morning, brilliant surgeon, runs her own clinic, and the frustration she is having with the younger generation. And I can just imagine people, oh my goodness, this guy is a dinosaur. The speaking of myself, wow, he's been around for a while. All his opinions are rather slanted. Um, and I think that's something all of us have to watch. There's stereotypes at all levels.
Hmm.
Um, some of the claims are the younger generation, Gen Z, is unmotivated. The real evidence would say they are not motivated if you don't give them motivation, if you don't give them purpose, if you don't. Just yesterday, in a curriculum meeting, hearing some of the professors say, well, I learn differently than my students. They are used to much more interactive, shorter. Someone said they're used to watching YouTube for a lot of their content, and
Hmm.
not in a disparaging way,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of great content on YouTube. And they have a professor who has been up there for 40 years using the same materials, pretty much, a bit of an exaggeration, and wondering why he's getting poor reviews from the students.
Yeah.
So, talk to a bit about the those myths, how you're seeing that, the realities of a multi-generational workforce.
Um, I was having a conversation the other day with a head of school, head of a private school, and he shared that I'm trying to remember the exact time frame, whether it was 10 or 15 years ago, say something like that. The criteria to get into the University of Pennsylvania, right, an Ivy League institution,
Mhm.
the same criteria will now get you into Gettysburg College. In other words, the odds, right?
Yeah.
And so, what, and this is not to be disparaging of any institution, but what to me it speaks to is how much the game has changed. And
Mhm.
so I think that this meaning, Gen Z in particular, I mean, are quite impressive in terms of the obstacles that they have to face, right? The increasing, challenges just to make it in the world, if I'm being honest, right? I mean, the average age of buying a home now is 40. I mean, that's just, this is just a different, this is a really different world. But yet, I mean, I work with, folks, right? Graduate, well, more, our folks were coming out of PhD programs, right? So
Mhm.
not just undergrad, but still, I mean, relatively, younger in their careers, right? Coming out of PhDs, uh,
Mhm.
right? Folks coming out of med school, et cetera. The amount of work that they've had to do to get there is just simply really amazing. And the way that, they show up every day is eager to contribute, right, in all facets of the work that we do, right? Whether it's not only client work, right? It's building the firm, it's building our capabilities. And so I think that, when you have um, a workforce that is made up of people who've had to work so hard just to get where they've gotten, right? Like with a bar that seems to go up like every, X number of years. I get that they could show up to a job and because I experienced this, myself, right? You come out of college, you're like, I am now gonna just conquer the world, right? I can do anything, and you show up and you kind of have these right, some tasks that you're like, really? Like this is what do I have to do this? Why do I have to do this? I don't understand. There's just this sense of, why are people giving me a job with something that I feel is quote unquote beneath the level of my ability, right? And some of that is because you don't know what you don't know, and I think that that's this sort of myth about being, unmotivated, right? And that's why I think that the importance of, folks who are more senior, more established in their career, taking an interest in folks. Like if all of these people, right, coming into new jobs, if everybody started a new job, they had, a like a counselor, a mentor, an advisor, right? Who
Mhm.
can kind of connect with them and understand, what are you thinking about, in your career? Where do you want to go? Okay, let me talk to you about how this work is going to help get you there. Helping them make those connections, taking that personal interest and showing them. Because don't forget, I mean, that's what the other thing that a lot of people have experienced um day to day, right? I mean, there was that, kind of euphemism about helicopter parents or
Yeah.
whatnot,
Yeah.
so a lot of people, that's how they're used to interacting with people who are their caregivers, their seniors, if you will, right? And
Mhm.
so I think without having to do it in an oppressive way, but from a genuine place of interest. Like, I am here to connect with you. I am here to help you understand, the types of lessons that you need to learn, the experiences that you need to have, to get from point A to point B, in this particular setting. And I'm
Mhm.
here to help you learn and do that. That to me, I think is how people could help, sort of dispel some of those myths and help people ultimately uh, be more successful. And I think some of it too is, from I'm thinking about the healthcare setting. I do think that people, uh, as people have come up through the generations, I think not simply accepting the status quo and fighting for change that is smart and makes sense is a good thing. Like, I've never been a fan of the leaders who are like, well, I had to do this, so you have to do this. Like, no. No. Because, there are good lessons that need to be carried down and taught, but there are better ways to do things. And I think that, everybody, right, should be open and receptive to change and allowing for new and better ways to come along.
And I think this may segue to another one of our pre-call conversations. I was intrigued by the phrase compound expertise.
Mm-hmm.
This explain what you meant by that.
So compound expertise is really the philosophy that's underpinned, my particular journey, but I think it's one that is going to be much more important going forward for people. And so I think even like Sheryl Sandberg said this the other day, even thinking about your career in, 5 to 10 year increments is sort of becoming rapidly passé, in the age of AI. And I myself have always been interested in, I would say, like connecting the dots or the value of expertise that you can bring from different disciplines, where you can acquire that experience and then bring it to the next thing that you're doing.
Mhm.
And I've just purposefully sought that out, throughout my career. And to be honest, I had what I think is a misplaced a bias, right? Because we all have biases. I thought that I couldn't experience that if I worked for one company for a long period of time. So
Mhm.
I kind of purposefully thought like, okay, kind of like, go here, do this, go here, do this. And that was just the way that I thought. I do think that companies are better about that now. And I think that, the very, very rare occasion with where people stay with a company for a long period of time. I do think the companies are quite open and receptive to have people working in like different departments, right? Different things, learning different things. But, increasingly, I think that folks should think about their career as accumulation of experiences because no matter what happens, I mean, in the sense of, we don't know what the future will hold. We are already seeing some displacements. Those displacements are being publicly linked to AI. I think in some cases that's a convenient message that is not necessarily the truth, to be honest. But I do think overall, as AI continues to mature at the step rate at which it's maturing now, the workforce will change and the expectations around job length will change just because of that. And I think we kind of have to shift away from sort of the judgments that go along with that to the fact of what our world is becoming, right? And our world is becoming a world which vastly rewards people who can leverage AI to build, to create,
Mhm.
to take and learn things, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's at a company, or whether it's, learning provided through AI in an ad hoc fashion, to learn and take those lessons to build for the future. And that's, I think, a world that we're kind of evolving to.
So dovetailing right into that last statement, I've worked with some younger people that, and my heart goes out to them. I mean, I just finished my, as it were, I just finished my Bachelor of Science in Nursing. I'm really excited. I'm passionate about bedside care, and I'm terrified that what I just spent $80,000 getting in a few short years is going to be obsolete. My response many times is a motivated, passionate learning brain will never be obsolete. However, I haven't I haven't had your level of expertise in just how threatening this might be. So to that person who's thinking, I love what I do and what I do may not be around in a while, any not survival tips, but anticipatory tips or thinking that could help that terrified nurse say, hey, this is what you could start doing to mitigate the risk.
Yes. So I think the first thing is that, jobs which largely are computer based and knowledge economy based are, I believe, Tara's opinion, right? No one else's, are going to be extremely vulnerable in the next, X years, right? Say, whether that's 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, right? Um, there are things that, AI can do and do a lot faster and a lot better with minimal human supervision required. And so I think, what it comes down to, and that's actually coming a little bit full circle to like the value of an education, in terms of, I do feel that a lot of folks, were kind of told to go into computer science, right? Go into, coding, right? Go into those types of careers. And um, I just, I just don't see that being viable going forward at scale. I actually think that nursing is one of the more, and things like patient care, in the healthcare in particular, right? Because of the structure of healthcare, at least in the US, I think there are some built-in, kind of safe havens for a while where, I think that in terms of AI disruption, it will be fewer. And I actually think doctors are much more susceptible to AI than nurses because you need patient care, like true, patient care. Like we do not yet have robots that can watch patients after surgery, right? I mean, I did say yet, but, I think at least for a few years, that, nurses are one of the more safe professions. But I mean, AI, already in some fields, and I mean, this has been decades now, in some fields, right? AI is, sort of proven to make quote unquote better decisions. I don't mean that as a blanket statement, but and it's sort of getting better, right? So you can imagine a world in which, you have doctors sort of overseeing, right, patient care decisions that are driven by AI, which could mean, right, fewer doctors. Now, whether that means things like fewer, PAs and Ps, I think that's a very good, kind of thought-provoking discussion, right, in terms of the healthcare landscape. But, what I would advise, folks to do, and the biggest unfortunate thing that I think about right now is that not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, and that should be okay, right? We should have a place in society for people who want to just sort of execute well, have a very important role to play in an organization, to be a leader of teams, to be a leader of people, and increasingly, I mean, honestly, to be like a leader of agents, because that's where the workforce is, rapidly already going.
Mhm.
And so where I get stuck on the question is I don't know necessarily what to tell people who don't want to be entrepreneurs. And so I can say, like, I mean, again, I've got, a young son, right? Not even in first grade. I mean, but that's the way that I intend to, raise him, right? Is what mark do you want to make on the world? Because you're going to have to build it and own it and do it. And hopefully there's going to be the financial ecosystem around you to support
Mhm.
it,
Yeah.
but it's just a really, really, it's a really interesting time. I have to say, like as a side note, all growing up, my entire life, I always said that, I wish that I were alive in 1968 because of the turmoil in the country and the
Mhm.
pivotal moment that happened in U.S. history, and I would have
Yeah.
loved to have seen that and been a part of it and figured
Mhm.
out what would I've done in that time.
Yeah.
And honestly, like I think I in a way got what I what I wished for, because I think honestly being alive in this moment in time is really, really fascinating, and it leads to deep, philosophical discussions that I think are really, really interesting, and we'll see where we go.
Well said. Shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody since I'm such a history buff. Tara, I remember looking at the cover of Life magazine in June of 68 with the assassination of Bobby Kennedy.
Hmm.
And I remember being in the hotel room on the night in April with my parents. We were in Disneyland, and Martin Luther King had been assassinated that day. And I don't think that turmoil has any more turmoil than what we're looking at right now.
Hmm.
You're absolutely true, right. And I think getting to your point, to teach a child or a student or whoever you're influencing or I'm influencing, to have that I will build what I need instead of someone else will give it to me is absolutely just so important. So, as we wrap up here, I want you just to describe a bit about, for all we've talked about, the training, the thinking, the problem solving, where would blue matter come in on that one? Where would tell us a bit about what blue matter does and how it would apply to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of executives in the healthcare space, we do quite a bit of work with leaders, right? Whether it's the administrative side, right, or the medical side, with operating model optimization, preparing the workforce for AI. I myself lead several seminars on that, given just that I've been working with this since 2016, right before Gen AI even was, in the mainstream. And so kind of seeing that evolution, getting people comfortable with AI, how they can use it, how their teams can use it. Some of your listeners, right, will be more advanced and some won't. So for those folks that are more advanced, we really get into the op model, the org design of the future. That's one area. Another area where we go very deep is on research and also technology transfer. So, in particular, I've helped a number of organizations really understand the landscape of not only technology transfer, but like innovation and entrepreneurship, and how those functions can, particularly in the current environment, help to be a real powerful source of revenue for the institution, to really help drive faculty engagement, to help faculty be able to serve on startups or spinouts, to really like help commercialize their research, kind of in the spirit of entrepreneurship that we've been talking about. So whether it's sort of classic op model, people in organ process work, or those particular nuances around AI, clinical research, or technology transfer, those are things that we've got really deep experience and reference clients, right, that I'm happy to connect people with.
How do people get a hold of you?
So I am, so LinkedIn is great, right? My name is uncommon. So if you look up, Austraat-Churik, you will find me. Also, at via Blue Matter as well. My contact information is on our website along with my short bio. So happy to connect that way.
Excellent. We'll put that in the show notes.
Oh, thank
Sarah,
you.
this has been a marvelous hour. Thank you so much for just digging in on a few questions that we talked about, and the majority that you had no idea I would ask because they just came to mind. So thanks for going along with a lot of different thought streams today. Very appreciated.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.